We just talked about what happens when the government imposes a tax in a perfectly competitive market. We talked about who pays more of the tax and how this depends on elasticity. A market that often gets taxed is the hotel industry. For example, when cities want to build new sports stadiums, they sometimes pass a small tax on hotel rooms. Who bears the bigger tax burden in this case? In 2013, the average hotel room cost $110 per night. Roughly 3 million hotel rooms were rented on any given day. So let's draw a supply and demand graph for hotel rooms, with an equilibrium price of $110 and an equilibrium quantity of 3 million rooms. Now let's assume the government imposes a $7 tax on each hotel room sold. Technically, the hotel operator pays the $7. But the hotel can always increase room prices, so that the consumer pays some part of that. Who bears more of the burden in the real world? Two economists calculated the elasticity of supply of hotels, and they found that it was 2.86, whereas the elasticity of demand for hotel rooms was 0.44. That's a very elastic supply and a fairly inelastic demand. So what will the tax burden look like? With the tax on hotels, we draw a new supply curve that shifts up by the $7 tax. It intersects the demand curve at a lower quantity, which we can assume is 2.9 million. With the tax, consumers now pay a higher market price of $116. What about producers? They receive $116, but they have to send $7 to the government, so they only end up keeping $109. We can see this on the graph. Start at the new equilibrium. Now drop a dashed line down to the old supply curve. Once you hit it, draw a dashed line over to the vertical axis. This gives you the after-tax price received by producers, $109. So who bears more of the burden? The consumers bear the difference between the price they pay and the old price, which is $6, and the hotels bear the remaining $1. So when a city passes a hotel tax to pay for a stadium, mayors will often argue that the hotel industry will be footing the bill. In reality, more of it falls to hotel guests. In the past few years, however, the hotel industry has been changing. Sites like Airbnb have popped up, which create markets for home sharing. If you have a large house, you can list it on Airbnb and have guests stay in a room of your house. As of 2014, for every 5 hotel rooms in the US, there was 1 room available on Airbnb. And Airbnb has only gotten more popular since then. What does this do to demand for hotel rooms? Well, suddenly we have a new substitute for hotel rooms that can be a lot nicer. It's often cheaper too. A new substitute with a lower price means that the demand curve for hotel rooms should get more elastic, because there are now better substitutes for hotel rooms. Indeed, a more recent estimate of hotel taxes finds that the price elasticity of demand for hotel rooms is now closer to 1.5. That's a lot more elastic demand than it used to be. Now that the demand curve has gotten flatter, what happens to the tax burden for hotel taxes? Let's say the new equilibrium quantity is 2.75 million rooms rented per night at an equilibrium price of $100. To show what the tax does, we once again draw a supply curve that shifts up by the amount of the tax, $7. On this graph, the new quantity demanded is lower than before, 2.25 million. What's the new price that consumers pay? Start at the new equilibrium and walk over to the vertical axis. Consumers now pay a price of $101. What do producers receive? They get $101 from the consumers, but have to pay $7 to the government. So they end up with only $94 after tax. You can see that by starting at the new equilibrium, walking down to the old supply curve, then over to the vertical axis. Now producers bear $6 of the tax instead of just $1. Airbnb therefore means that hotels are paying a higher share of hotel taxes. As you can imagine, they're not so happy about this. But that's not the only reason hotels hate Airbnb. In most cities, Airbnb hosts pay no hotel tax. If you list your house and someone pays you $100 to stay with you, you pay $3 to Airbnb in fees, but nothing to the city government. So not only does Airbnb compete with hotels and cause hotels to pay a bigger burden of hotel taxes, it also is able to offer a cheaper product by avoiding those same taxes. We'll see how things move in the future. Hotels are now lobbying local governments to tax Airbnb rooms. Regardless of the outcome, hotels give us a good example of tax burden. And the popularity of Airbnb gives us a good example of how these tax burdens change when elasticity changes.